Have you ever walked away from a conversation, replaying every word in your mind, only to feel like you lost, even though you said everything you thought you needed to? That heavy knot in your throat, that sting of frustration, the sense that no one really heard you. It's like you showed up ready to play fair, but the game was stacked against you from the start. Maybe you've been in a room where the loudest voices always take the floor, where interruptions pass as confidence, where arrogance hides behind a smile and people applaud it. And maybe you've told yourself, if I don't speak up, if I don't fight back, it means I've given up. It means I'm weak. But what if I told you that's a lie you've been sold? What if silence isn't weakness at all, but the sharpest edge of strength? We grow up in a culture that worships noise. From classrooms to boardrooms, from family tables to social media feeds, we are told that the person who speaks the most, the one who argues the hardest, wins. Our society equates words with dominance. If you clap back the fastest, if you never back down, if you always have something to say, then you're strong. And if you don't, you're dismissed as timid, passive, maybe even a pushover. But that's the illusion. Because history, psychology, and human nature all point to something very different. Silence, when chosen intentionally, is not absence. It is not retreat. It is presence. It is pressure. It is the kind of strength that unsettles others without you lifting a finger. Think about it. Have you ever been in a conversation where someone simply went quiet? They didn't nod along, they didn't argue, they didn't fill the air with explanations. They just sat there, calm, unshaken, eyes locked. And suddenly, the person speaking begins to stumble, words get tangled, their confidence falters. Why does that happen? Because silence is not a void. It's a mirror. It reflects insecurity back to the one talking. And in that reflection, people see themselves exposed. They lose the comfort of controlling the flow. They start to feel judged, even if not a single judgment was spoken. That's the hidden power silence holds. And most of us don't use it because we confuse it with surrender. This is where the knot in your throat comes from. That inner voice that says, you should have said more, you should have defended yourself, you should have fought harder. But let me ask you, fought for what? For someone else's approval? For the illusion of being right in their eyes? Here's the truth, most people don't argue to find truth. They argue to dominate, to protect fragile egos, to keep their narrative intact. If you step into that arena, you've already surrendered your power because you've accepted their terms. You're playing their game. And when you play their game, they set the rules. That's why you leave feeling drained, unheard, defeated. Not because you were wrong, but because you wasted energy trying to prove yourself to people who were never listening. So what if silence is not losing at all? What if silence is walking out of the game entirely? Imagine this, you're in a heated argument, and instead of trying to shout louder, you stop. You don't flinch. You don't scramble for words. You simply hold yourself steady. In that moment, you stop reacting and start radiating. And that's when the tables turn. Because silence forces the other person to confront themselves. And that confrontation is far more powerful than any comeback you could throw at them. But here's the problem. Most of us have been conditioned to fear silence. We feel naked without words, like we're doing something wrong by holding back. We think, if I don't answer, they'll think I'm weak. And yes, some people might. But their judgment doesn't define you. Your strength is not measured by how loud you can get, but by how little you need to prove. Real strength is not in the noise, it's in the composure. It's in the ability to remain unshaken while the world around you thrashes in chaos. Let me paint it another way. Picture a storm. Thunder cracks, lightning splits the sky, rain lashes the ground. It's loud, it's dramatic, it demands attention. But then picture a mountain. Still. Silent. Immovable. Which one has more power? Which one will outlast the other? The storm rages and dies, but the mountain remains. That's the silence I'm talking about. The silence of presence. The silence that doesn't need to prove, because it already is. And maybe right now you're thinking, But if I stay silent, won't people walk all over me? Won't they think they've won? That's the fear speaking, not the truth. The truth is, silence unsettles more than shouting ever could. Because people expect noise. They expect a fight. They know how to spar with words. What they don't know how to handle is your refusal to play. Your stillness makes them squirm. Your calm makes them question. And in that tension, you reclaim your ground without lifting your voice. So let's turn this illusion on its head. Silence is not giving up. Silence is choosing not to waste your energy. Silence is stepping out of the performance, the endless need to justify, explain, and defend. Silence is strategy. It's strength. It's self-respect. And when you master it, you stop being the easy target. You stop being the one who always folds to keep the peace. You become the one who commands peace by refusing to be dragged into noise. In the end, the choice is yours. You can keep chasing approval, keep playing games where the loudest voice wins, keep leaving conversations drained and resentful. Or you can step into a different kind of power, the power of silence. The silence that doesn't beg to be understood, but insists on being respected. The silence that unsettles, that disarms, that wins without lifting a sword. Because sometimes the loudest thing you can say is nothing at all. Why do we feel such a burning need to respond when someone challenges us? Why does it feel impossible to stay quiet when someone questions our choices, mocks our ideas, or twists our words? Deep down, we've been conditioned to believe that silence equals defeat. That if we don't clap back, if we don't defend ourselves, the other person wins. But let me tell you something, that's not strength, it's ego. And ego is the most fragile thing in the room. Think about the last time you got pulled into an argument you didn't even want. Maybe it was at work, maybe at the dinner table, maybe with a friend who always has to be right. At first, you told yourself you'd stay calm. But then the words came, and before you knew it, you were defending yourself, justifying every decision, every thought, every move. And when it was over, you walked away exhausted, replaying what you should have said. That wasn't strength. That was ego dragging you into someone else's game. See, the ego hates silence. It interprets silence as humiliation. The ego wants applause, validation, proof that it's right. It can't stand being questioned because a question feels like a wound. That's why we jump in so quickly, why we fight so hard to explain ourselves. But let's be honest, how many arguments have you actually won? Not in the sense of silencing the other person, but in the sense of truly changing their mind. Rarely, if ever. Because most people don't argue to discover truth. They argue to feel powerful, to defend their narrative, to protect the story they tell themselves about who they are. And once you realize that, you start to see how empty the whole battle really is. It's like stepping into a theater. The moment you begin arguing, you've taken your place on their stage. They hand you a script, defend this, prove that, justify yourself. And you perform it, thinking you're fighting back. But the truth is, they've already won because you agreed to play their play. The louder you get, the more energy you spend, the deeper you sink into their script. And that's why you walk away feeling like you lost, because you did. Not the argument itself, but your freedom. You gave them your time, your peace, your presence, and in return, you got nothing but frustration. Now here's the twist, you don't owe anyone a performance. You don't owe anyone an explanation just to keep their comfort intact. The idea that you must always defend yourself, that you must always prove your side, is the oldest trap the ego sets. And we fall into it every time. We confuse being understood with being respected. We confuse being validated with being strong. But the truth is, the strongest people are the ones who don't need to be understood by everyone. They don't beg for approval, they don't waste breath proving their worth, because they already know it. And yet, let's be honest, doesn't it feel almost unbearable not to respond? When someone mocks you or twists your words, your chest tightens, your pulse races, your mind burns with comebacks. That's the ego screaming. That's the voice that says, if you don't fight, you'll look weak. If you don't speak, you'll disappear. But here's the paradox. The moment you react, the moment you start explaining, you've already surrendered. Because true power doesn't need explanation. It doesn't need to prove itself. It just is. You see this all the time in people who never stop talking. They dominate conversations, cut others off, throw statistics and stories at you like weapons. But if you listen closely, underneath all that noise is fear. Fear of not being believed. Fear of being irrelevant. Fear of being exposed. That's why they fight so hard, because without the words, without the noise, their insecurity would bleed through. And here's the truth, if you feel an uncontrollable need to explain yourself, to defend your position at every turn, it's not because you're strong. It's because you're afraid of being misunderstood. It's because you still believe that other people's approval defines you. Let me put it like this, imagine two people at a poker table. One keeps showing his cards, defending his every move, justifying why he played the hand the way he did. The other sits silently, unreadable, eyes steady. Who has the advantage? The one who talks has already revealed his weaknesses. The one who stays silent holds all the power. That's what life is like when you stop feeding the ego. You stop showing your cards. You stop giving others free access to your insecurities. And suddenly, you are no longer at their mercy. You're free. This is what I call the trap of validation. Most of us spend our lives seeking it. We want to be seen as smart, as good, as strong, as correct. We want people to nod and say, "You're right." But every time you chase that nod, you hand over your power. Because the moment you need their agreement, you're chained to their opinion. And chains, no matter how polished, are still chains. So let me ask you, what would your life look like if you stopped needing to be validated? What would change if you no longer felt the urge to defend every decision, every word, every belief? You would stop being reactive. You would stop being the easy target. And you would start standing in a kind of strength most people never touch, the strength of someone who doesn't need to explain themselves. The strength of someone whose silence unsettles because it signals mastery. The next time you feel the urge to fight back, remember this: ego wants to win battles. Spirit wants to transcend them. And the moment you stop fighting for validation, you step out of the battlefield completely. You realize that not every attack deserves a response, not every insult deserves your energy, not every challenge deserves your time. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. And that's where real power begins. There's a figure that philosophers have talked about for over a century, and yet most people never really understand him. Friedrich Nietzsche called him the Übermensch, translated often as the overman or superior human. Now, don't get hung up on the name. What matters is the idea behind it. The overman is not just someone who's stronger or smarter. He is someone who has broken free from the invisible strings that control most people, the need to be liked, the hunger for approval, the craving for applause. He doesn't live by the morality of the crowd. He creates his own rules, his own values, his own reality. And one of his greatest weapons is silence. Picture this for a moment. A room full of noise. People arguing, interrupting, talking over each other, each one desperate to be heard. Now imagine one person in that room who doesn't raise his voice, who doesn't scramble to jump in. He just sits there, calm, collected, silent. His presence alone shifts the energy. People glance his way. They start to wonder, what is he thinking? Why isn't he reacting? Does he know something we don't? That is the silence of the overman. It isn't emptiness. It's authority. It's a kind of silent gravity that pulls the whole room toward him without him saying a word. Silence at that level is not passive. It's not the silence of someone too scared to speak. It's not the silence of someone who has nothing to say. It's the silence of control, of choice, of mastery. The overman understands that words are not free. Every word you speak gives away a piece of your energy, a piece of your position, a piece of your power. So he uses them like a scalpel, not a fire hose. When he finally speaks, people listen, not because he shouted the loudest, but because they've been waiting, because his silence has already done the work of building suspense. By the time he opens his mouth, the room is already leaning in. Think about the leaders, the mentors, even the strangers you've respected the most in your life. Were they the ones who never stopped talking? Or were they the ones who could hold a room with their silence, whose presence carried weight, who didn't need to prove themselves with constant chatter? We feel it instinctively. Silence in the hands of a master is not absence. It's a kind of presence so strong it unsettles others. And that's why it's powerful. Now let's flip the script. Why is silence so unsettling to other people? Because most of us expect noise. We expect debates. We expect the back and forth of a fight. When that doesn't come, we're left alone with our own voices, our own thoughts, our own insecurities. And that can be terrifying. The silence of the overman doesn't just hold him steady, it forces everyone else to confront themselves. It forces them to wrestle with their own doubt, their own fear, their own masks. And that's why silence can feel like a weapon. Because it cuts deeper than words ever could. But here's where it gets really interesting. The overman doesn't just use silence to manipulate or control others. He uses it to free himself. You see, once you stop needing to argue, once you stop needing to prove yourself, once you stop chasing approval, you step outside the cage that traps almost everyone else. Most people are slaves to what Nietzsche called herd morality, the unspoken rules of the crowd that say you must fit in, you must be polite, you must defend yourself, you must win people over. The overman says no. He doesn't need the herd. He doesn't need the applause. He doesn't need the constant validation. His silence is proof that he's already free. And this isn't about being cold or disconnected. The overman can be passionate, compassionate, fiery when he chooses to be. But the key word is chooses. His emotions don't control him. His ego doesn't drag him into fights that don't matter. His silence shows he's mastered himself first. And self-mastery is the deepest kind of power there is. Because if you can master yourself, your ego, your impulses, your need to be understood, then nobody else can master you. Let me make it concrete. Imagine you're in a meeting at work and someone takes a shot at your idea. The old version of you might have jumped in, defended yourself, explained why they were wrong, tried to prove your worth. The overman version of you sits back, silent, steady. The silence itself makes the critic uncomfortable. They keep talking, filling the space, over-explaining. Others in the room start noticing their insecurity instead of yours. And when you finally decide to respond, if you even need to, it's brief, precise, undeniable. That's power. Not because you crushed them with words, but because you didn't need to. Or take it to your personal life. Someone throws an insult your way, hoping to bait you into a fight. Most people snap back instantly, feeding the fire. But you, if you embrace this kind of silence, don't take the bait. You don't flinch. You let their words hang in the air. And suddenly the weight of their insult falls back on them. They look small, petty, desperate. And you? You stand untouched. That's the silence of presence. That's the silence that commands respect. And maybe you're thinking, this sounds great, but I'm not Nietzsche's overman. I'm just me. But that's the point. The overman isn't some mythical figure. He's an ideal, a direction to grow toward. Every time you resist the urge to defend yourself, every time you choose presence over reaction, every time you let silence speak instead of your ego, you step closer to that ideal. You become someone others can't easily shake. You become someone who shapes the space around you without even trying. So the real question is, are you willing to embrace that kind of silence? Not the silence of fear, not the silence of surrender, but the silence of mastery. The silence that says, I don't need your approval. I don't need to win this argument. I don't need to prove myself. The silence that makes others lean in, question themselves, and feel your strength without you uttering a word. That is the silence of the overman. And once you taste it, you'll never go back to the noise. Let's dig into why silence has such an impact on people. Why does it make them so uneasy? Why does it shake even the most confident talker in the room? The answer lies not just in philosophy, But in psychology, silence is not just the absence of sound. Silence is a mirror, and what it reflects can be unbearable. Most people don't talk to express themselves. They talk to protect themselves. They talk to fill space, to convince themselves that their point of view holds weight, to hide the cracks in their confidence. Words are often camouflage. They cover up fear, insecurity, doubt. But here's the thing, when you respond with silence, you strip away that camouflage. You force people to hear their own voices echoing back at them. And that's where the discomfort begins. Studies in social psychology tell us that silence in a confrontational setting is almost always interpreted as judgment. You don't have to say a single word, and yet the other person feels like you're dissecting every syllable they utter. They start asking themselves questions they can't answer. Did I go too far? Do I sound foolish? Did they see through me? The human brain hates uncertainty. It craves feedback, even negative feedback, because feedback means control. Without it, the brain spins out. Anxiety rises. The amygdala, the part of your brain responsible for fear and threat detection, lights up. And suddenly the person who thought they were in control is spiraling. All because you refuse to react. Think about manipulators, the ones who thrive on stirring emotions and pulling strings. They depend on your reaction. That's their fuel. They need your outrage, your defensiveness, your tears, your anger. Every time you react, you hand them proof that they've hooked you. But what happens when you don't react? When you meet their tactics with silence? They panic. They push harder, they exaggerate, they lash out, because without your emotional response, they lose their leverage. They have no script to follow. And in that moment, the mask slips. Their weakness shows. They can no longer hide behind the illusion of control. And it doesn't stop there. Silence can trigger much deeper wounds. For people who carry unresolved pain, memories of rejection, abandonment, humiliation, silence reopens those scars. They feel invisible again. They feel dismissed again. They feel like they don't matter. And because that pain is intolerable, they will do anything to make you break the silence. They'll insult you, mock you, provoke you, anything to pull you back into the noise where they feel safer. But if you hold steady, if you don't bite, the silence doesn't just defend you, it attacks at the very heart of their illusion. Now let's flip it back on you. Why is silence so hard for you, too? Why does it feel almost unbearable to hold your tongue when your whole body screams to react? Because silence doesn't just force others to face themselves. It forces you to face yourself. It goes against everything you've been taught. From childhood, you were trained to explain, to justify, to apologize, to fill every awkward pause. You were told that if you don't speak, you'll be misunderstood, overlooked, forgotten. So when you choose silence, you're not just breaking someone else's pattern, you're breaking your own conditioning. And that's uncomfortable. But it's also the path to mastery. Because real strength is never comfortable at first. Picture a courtroom. A lawyer is hammering questions at a witness. The witness doesn't flinch. Doesn't argue. Doesn't defend. Just sits in silence. The lawyer grows louder, more desperate, filling the space with words. Who looks stronger in that moment? Not the one shouting. The silence itself shifts the balance of power. It exposes the lawyer's insecurity. It makes the jury question the aggressor, not the quiet one. That's the psychology of silence in action. The absence of reaction becomes the most powerful reaction in the room. And here's the deeper truth: silence unmasks people. It strips away their armor. It reveals their cracks. Every insult they throw, every argument they spin, every explanation they pile on, those are just shields. When you refuse to engage, those shields crumble. They're left alone with themselves. And often, that's the most terrifying enemy they'll ever face. This is why silence requires strength. Because it's not easy. It demands discipline. It demands that you stand still while everything inside you wants to lash out. It demands that you master your own ego, your own impulses, your own craving for validation. But once you do, once you learn to wield silence deliberately, you discover it's not emptiness at all. It's a weapon. An invisible blade that cuts through the noise, not by fighting it, but by refusing to be part of it. So the next time someone tries to bait you, the next time they hurl words like arrows, the next time they wait for your defense, try silence. Watch what happens. Watch how quickly their confidence falters. Watch how their performance unravels without your participation. Watch how the balance shifts, not because you shouted louder, but because you chose not to play. That's the chaos silence creates in the minds of others. That's the power most people never discover because they're too afraid of the quiet. Remember this, silence doesn't mean nothing is happening. Silence means everything is happening, inside them, inside you, in the very air between you. It's tension. It's presence. It's control. And when you learn to hold it, when you stop running from the discomfort, you'll realize silence isn't weakness at all. It's pure dominance. It's the sound of mastery. And it speaks louder than any argument ever could. Up to this point, we've been exploring the philosophy and the psychology behind silence. We've seen how it disarms others, how it unravels their confidence, how it reflects their insecurities back at them. But now it's time to move from theory to practice. Because knowing the power of silence means nothing if you don't learn how to use it. And let me tell you, once you master it, silence becomes one of the sharpest weapons you'll ever carry. The first strategy is this: be silent when everything in you is screaming to respond. This is the hardest part, because it feels unnatural. Someone takes a shot at you, questions your decision, or mocks your values, and your instinct is to fire back. Your ego wants blood. Your body floods with adrenaline, your thoughts race, and your tongue is ready to launch a defense. But here's the truth: every time you give in to that impulse, you're playing their game. You're letting them pull you into their theater, into their rules. The discipline is in resisting. The discipline is in holding back. And in that restraint lies your power. Because the one who doesn't react cannot be controlled. The second strategy is observation. Silence isn't just about what you don't say, it's about what you notice. When you're quiet, you're not waiting for your turn to speak. You're listening like a hunter in the woods. You're picking up on the tremor in someone's voice, the contradiction in their story, the insecurity behind their aggression. You're reading the small details, the flicker in their eyes, the nervous laugh, the extra explanation that reveals doubt. This is information, and information is power. So when you do choose to speak, you speak with precision. One sentence, one pointed question, one observation that lands like a strike. Silence gave you the advantage to see what they tried to hide. The third strategy is time. Most people rush to fill silence because it feels uncomfortable. They want to fill the air, to escape the tension, to regain control. But you don't. You let silence stretch. You let the pause hang. That pause is not weakness, it's pressure. It builds like a weight on the other person's chest. They start scrambling, guessing what you're thinking, revealing more than they intended. And the longer you hold that silence, the more power shifts to you. Imagine being able to unnerve someone not by shouting, but by simply holding their gaze and saying nothing. That's not passivity. That's dominance. The fourth strategy is unpredictability. Silence keeps people guessing. One moment you're listening quietly, the next you deliver a statement that lands like a hammer. They never know when you'll respond, how you'll respond, or if you'll respond at all. And unpredictability breeds caution. When people don't know what to expect, they tread carefully. They measure their words. They lose the confidence they had when they thought you'd play along. Suddenly, you are no longer reacting to their moves, they're reacting to yours. You've become the gravitational center of the interaction. But let me make something very clear. Silence as a weapon is not about hiding forever. It's not about staying mute in the face of life. It's about holding back until the exact right moment. Because when that moment comes, when the silence has already worked its magic, you can break it with a single sentence that ends the argument. Not by being louder, but by being sharper. By saying less, but meaning more. A precise truth cuts deeper than 1,000 defensive words. And the silence before it makes that truth impossible to ignore. Let me give you an example. Imagine you're in a meeting, and someone challenges your idea with arrogance. Instead of defending yourself, you stay silent. You observe. You let them over-explain, expose their own flaws, talk themselves into a corner. Then, when the moment is ripe, you deliver one calm, precise statement. That's an interesting point, but here's the actual data. Silence made them stumble. Your few words finished the job. That's how silence becomes a scalpel instead of a shield. Now think about your personal life. Someone throws an insult at you, waiting for your reaction. You don't take the bait. You let the silence hang. The weight of their words falls back on them. And when you finally choose to speak, you don't fight fire with fire. You drop a simple truth like a stone in the middle of the noise. Maybe it's, that says more about you than it does about me. Short. Calm. Devastating. And it works because the silence set the stage. But I'll warn you, this isn't easy. It requires self-control at a level most people never reach. It demands that you tame your ego, that you fight the instinct to explain, to justify, to beg for validation. It demands that you sit in discomfort while others squirm. But if you can master it, you'll never see interactions the same way again. You'll stop wasting energy on battles that don't matter. You'll stop handing your power away for free. You'll discover that silence, when used intentionally, is not weakness at all, it's strategy. So the next time you're tempted to react, pause. The next time you feel the urge to defend, resist. The next time you want to fill the space, hold it. And remember this, silence doesn't mean nothing is happening. It means everything is happening, but under your control. Silence is not retreat. Silence is positioning. Silence is the weapon that turns the loudest noise into background static while you remain steady, calm, untouchable. And when you finally choose to break it, your words will carry the weight of a hammer. That is the art of silence as a weapon. And once you master it, you'll never waste your energy on empty arguments again. We've talked about silence as strength, silence as psychology, silence as a weapon. But now it's time to face a deeper truth. Because silence is not always power. Sometimes silence is submission. And if you're honest, you've probably lived that version too. The silence where you swallow your words not because you choose to, but because you're afraid. The silence where you let others walk all over you, because you'd rather keep the peace than rock the boat. The silence where you convince yourself it's not worth it, when really you just don't believe your voice matters. That kind of silence is not strategy. That kind of silence is surrender. And it's slowly killing you. You know exactly what I'm talking about. The times you let your boss take credit for your work because you didn't want to stir trouble. The times you let a family member insult you, brush it off, and pretended it didn't sting, when it did. The times you stayed quiet in a room full of people because you thought, why would anyone care what I have to say? That's not noble. That's not maturity. That's you giving away your power piece by piece until there's nothing left. And the worst part? You don't just give it away, you thank them for taking it. You call it keeping the peace. But it's not peace if you're the one carrying the weight. It's just disguised submission. This is where most people get stuck. They confuse being calm with being powerless. They confuse being kind with being invisible. They confuse avoiding conflict with living in peace. But that's not peace. That's domestication. That's you bending to the herd morality, living by rules written by people who want you small, quiet, compliant. And let me tell you, that's the opposite of what true silence is meant to be. Because true silence isn't about shrinking yourself. It's about standing so tall that you don't need to make noise. It's about commanding respect without begging for it. It's about showing the world, I'm here, and I don't owe anyone an apology for existing. So what's the difference between submission and mastery? Choice. Submission is silence you never chose. It's silence imposed on you by fear, guilt, or shame. Mastery is silence you own. It's silence you choose because you don't need to prove, because you don't need to beg, because you know exactly who you are. Submission drains you. Mastery fuels you. Submission makes you smaller. Mastery makes you unshakable. And the moment you understand that difference, you stop being a victim of your silence and start being the master of it. The silence of mastery is presence. It's the kind of silence that stands in a storm and refuses to flinch. It's the kind of silence that makes people look at you differently because they can feel your strength without you saying a word. It's the kind of silence that doesn't bend to pressure, doesn't fold under judgment, doesn't apologize for breathing. That silence is power. That silence is respect. And that silence is available to you right now, if you're willing to let go of the need to be accepted. But here's the hard part, mastering this silence requires courage. It's easy to lash out. It's easy to argue. It's even easy to stay submissively quiet. What's hard is to stand in the middle of the chaos, refuse to play the game, and still know your worth. What's hard is to let people misunderstand you and not rush to defend yourself. What's hard is to live without the applause, without the nods of approval, without the safety of being liked. That's what mastery demands. But that's also where freedom lives. Because once you stop needing their acceptance, they can't control you anymore. So I want you to think about your life right now. How many times have you been silent for the wrong reasons? How many times have you let someone else's voice drown out your own because you were afraid of conflict? How many times have you given away your dignity just to keep the room comfortable? Enough. You don't owe the world your silence if it comes from submission. But you do owe yourself the silence of mastery, the silence that commands respect, the silence that makes people lean in, the silence that says without words, I am not here to be controlled. This is the choice in front of you. You can keep living in the silence of fear, where your voice gets smaller and smaller until you forget it exists. Or you can step into the silence of mastery, where your presence alone speaks louder than any argument. Where your calm becomes your authority. Where your restraint becomes your power. The weak shout. The strong stay silent. The wise choose when. Which one will you be? Let me challenge you right now. Don't just listen to these words and nod. Make a decision. The next time someone tries to bait you, the next time you feel the pull to justify yourself, the next time you're tempted to fold just to keep the peace, stop. Hold your silence. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of choice. The silence of presence. And watch what happens. Watch how the room shifts. Watch how respect grows. Watch how free you feel. Because at the end of the day, silence is not absence. Silence is presence. Silence is mastery. Silence is the sound of someone who no longer needs the world's approval to exist. And that, my friend, is the kind of silence that will change not just how others see you, but how you see yourself. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this journey. I know your time is valuable. If this message spoke to you, if it gave you even one moment of clarity or peace, I'd be grateful if you'd let me know. A simple like, a comment with your thoughts, or subscribing to the channel helps this community grow, and it helps more people who might need these words to find them. Share your reflections below, I do read them. I'll see you in the next chapter. Until then, take care of your peace.